Okay.
Give me a chance to take a sip of water. Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. When we first started talking about my giving a presentation on this series, I had the question of, well, you know, it's not exactly a historic topic about New Mexico the way many of the lectures are. But then as we talked about it, and I thought about it a little more, the Santa Fe Symphony will be celebrating its 28th season in existence next year. And actually is a very important community resource and has been for that period of time. And in predecessor modes of various kinds, there have been musical ensembles performing here in Santa Fe probably for centuries. And there's an incredibly rich tradition of music that not only originated with the Native Americans, but then was brought by the Spanish, by way of Mexico, of course. I don't have to tell you all of this history. And it's been actually an interesting side project of mine, to explore some of these other influences that have affected the development of music here in New Mexico. And I've done research both here in the History Archive as well as in the Center for Southwest Research in Albuquerque at UNM, particularly the John Robb collection, which was a notable collection of folk music and other traditions that Dr. Robb really traveled all over the state and region in terms of collecting. But even preceding that, a couple of seasons ago, I arranged a piece for string orchestra, which was based on early Mexican, mostly religious music. That was part of the main part of the tradition was choral tradition. And so we're actually going back to the 16th century for some of those pieces. And it was really interesting to imagine how some of that music could come to life again in a modern day setting. But back to the Santa Fe Symphony. As I said, next season we'll be celebrating our 28th season. The symphony in its present form came into existence in 1984 with a concert at St. Francis Auditorium. It was enthusiastically received by the community. An free will offering donation was taken up, and it enabled the symphony to continue. There had been previous orchestras that were no longer operating at that point. But there were a number of people, both players and community supporters, who felt that it was important for Santa Fe to have its very own symphony orchestra. And happily, that has continued until today. In fact, today we have a wealth of resources. Many of the players who play in the Santa Fe Symphony are also players in what is unfortunately now the bankrupt New Mexico Symphony in Albuquerque. They are hoping to reform under a new organization, but we do share a lot of people. And you will occasionally see performances here in Santa Fe by orchestras that utilize many of our same players, but are actually not the Santa Fe Symphony in name. For example, Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve for a long time has been a concert tradition here, sponsored by the Concert Association. And that tradition is continuing now. But a lot of people get confused because they see a lot of the same faces on stage, but they're actually different organizations that present different concerts. We essentially present a season of one program a month between September and May, and all of our concerts are now held at the Lensing, of course, and we're celebrating actually 10 years of being in the Lensing. The two elements that have been really unique about the Santa Fe Symphony from the beginning are its business model, which is essentially a cooperative. Musicians from the very beginning have been involved in all of the decision making. They currently, as we've grown, there are 7 different seats on the board held by musicians, and those members are selected by the players themselves. The Santa Fe Symphony is a fully professional, large symphony orchestra. We're the only one of its kind in Santa Fe, a fully professional, large, full symphony orchestra with a wonderful chorus, which is also part of our umbrella. And so with all of these great resources, we are able to provide a wide range of programming, from very, very traditional, what we think of as mainstream classical repertoire, to more popular offerings and some other things, which I'll highlight along the way. I'm going to be playing some excerpts from some of our concerts, which for me represent some of the highlights of our recent history, and that will give us also a chance to talk a little bit about what will come in the future. We have been very lucky to have a great support from the business community as well as the individual community. A lot of people don't understand that a symphony orchestra, generally speaking, nationwide, raises roughly about 35% of its necessary operating funds by way of ticket sales. That's actually considered a pretty high mark, and so that means the balance of our budget needs to be made up by either government support, which is not a whole lot in this day and age, or by individual donations or business support. And we've been fortunate here to have a wide range of individual supporters, people who may have moved here from other places, who have supported orchestras and other cultural organizations. We're not unique. The museum, of course, has the same kind of benefit, the opera, all of these great institutions that we are proud of here in Santa Fe are the result of this kind of philanthropic endeavor. And so we are thrilled to be able to have that support. We have a number of relationships with different competitions, and one thing that we have been able to do over the past seasons is to present as soloists with our orchestra a number of up-and-coming young competition winners. And so we have been able to feature people from the Van Cliburn competition, the Indianapolis violin competition. In fact, one of our violin soloists next season is actually the current gold medal laureate from the Indianapolis competition. The Naumburg Foundation, which sponsors several different competitions, and we've had a long-standing relationship with them. The American Piano Association, which holds a very large competition as well in both classical and jazz elements. And so we've been able to collaborate in both of those genres over the past number of years. Well, let me talk a little bit about some of the great highlights of some of the past seasons. We have virtually every season celebrated a Beethoven festival. Arguably the greatest composer for orchestra that ever lived. Beethoven kind of single-handedly created the modern symphony orchestra, which is a topic for another time. But as a result, his music is held very, very close to those of us who perform his music. And to me personally, he's a very, very important composer. We've given a couple of different performances of the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. In fact, my very first concert as music director was a performance of the Beethoven Ninth. And more recently, we were delighted to have the wonderful pianist Anton Querti join us. In fact, to close our past season in May, over 2 evenings, we presented all 5 of the Beethoven piano concertos, which Mr. Querti kindly agreed to do. That's quite an undertaking. It's really a kind of marathon performance. And it was an enormous pleasure to share that repertoire with an artist of his stature and of his involvement with this repertoire. But another Beethoven festival that we explored a couple of summers ago was a recreation of one of the most famous evenings of music that ever existed in history. And this was what was called an Akademie. It was basically a fundraising concert that Beethoven put on for himself. And he wanted to feature a lot of new music. It was on a December evening, so if you can imagine being in a freezing church in Vienna in the middle of December, it lasted well over 4 hours. It saw the premieres of both the 5th Symphony and the 6th Symphony, as well as the 4th and 5th piano concertos. There were movements from the Missa Solemnis, from the Mass in, not the Missa Solemnis, the Mass in C. There was a soprano aria, and we thought it would be fun to kind of recreate this evening. And we did it over 2 evenings, rather than make anybody sit for well over 4 hours, and it was a huge success. And it was actually fascinating to hear all of this music in one chunk and to imagine what it must have been like at the time for an audience to hear this music fresh from Beethoven's pen and be experiencing it for the first time. So the first excerpt that I'd like to play, you may want to move a little bit. I want to warn you. Yeah. Just so you don't get blasted out here. This is actually, I chose this movement in the hopes that we might encourage some rain. This is the Storm movement from Beethoven's 6th Symphony, the Pastoral. And then, of course, it goes on into the final movement. So we'll see if that results in any rain. that is very close to me and that we have performed several different works of is the French composer Hector Berlioz. And so the second selection I'm going to play is from his Symphony Fantastique, which is one of the great war horses of the repertoire, an imaginative young composer. What I find extraordinary was about Berlioz, and particularly the Symphony Fantastique, is that it was not all that many years after the piece you just heard, and yet he has completely changed what the sound of the orchestra is. And so this is a short excerpt from the Symphony Fantastique, the very famous March to the Scaffold. Let's see if I can. That wonderful little clarinet solo at the end is the idée fixe, the idea that pervades the entire piece, and it's an incredibly vivid imagination at work. He's imagined this idée fixe represents the woman that he is hopelessly in love with, and the march to the scaffold is part of the dream in which he has dreamed that he's actually murdered her and is being carted off to the gallows at the end. It's an extraordinary imagination that Berlioz had, both in terms of the story, but also in terms of the way he approached music. I mentioned that we are delighted that a part of our family for many years now has been the Santa Fe Symphony Chorus, and it enables us to present a great number of choral and orchestral repertoire. And many people join our chorus for the specific reason that they are able to perform with a professional symphony orchestra, and it's really the only choral ensemble in town that does that on a regular basis. And we've done a number of things over the years, and I actually picked a short selection from one of the less familiar choral orchestral pieces that we've done. And this is a very early work by a very young Puccini. And it's interesting, this was before he really became the opera composer that we all know and love. This was while he was a young man very much under the spell of Verdi, of course, who was not at that point in Italy particularly. And so this was a very early piece that he wrote, but it was a mass, the Messa di Gloria. And yet it sounds basically like an opera when you hear it in its full. So I chose a little snippet that features the chorus from the Gloria. And this is also to highlight another thing that the symphony has been doing for a number of years. We have been reaching out to different colleges around the state and inviting choral ensembles from particularly UNM, from ENMU in Portales. Those are two that we kind of rotate between. And give the kids a chance to sing with an orchestra, which they really don't have a chance to do, as well as be able to open our doors and allow more people from around the state to be part of our performing family. So you will also hear, joining our chorus in this recording, the ENMU chorus as well, under the direction of Jason Paul. Our symphony chorus directed by Linda Ramey, of course. We have been really fortunate to have been able to welcome a number of incredible guest artists. And the list is very long, and I can't really play examples of all of them, but I think one in particular comes to mind because he's been a very good friend of the orchestra, and that is the pianist Andre Watts. He gave a benefit concert, even actually before I began as music director, and held at the opera. And it was at a very crucial time in the symphony's history, and it was his willingness to donate his services and come and play to help us out, which really helped us to be able to continue. And we were delighted then, a number of years later, to be able to invite him back when he didn't have to come for free and share a wonderful performance of the Rachmaninoff Second Piano Concerto. And I really treasure that as one of the great memories of my experience here, is being able to work with an artist of his stature. We've had other wonderful pianists like Mark-Andre Hamlin, for example, some fabulous violinists, Elmar Oliveira, Anna Kiko Myers, Rachel Barton Pine, Jimmy Lin, and some wonderful vocalists as well. Another great memory, which I have as much for the story as the experience, when we did the Verdi Requiem several years ago, we suddenly, and this happens quite frequently, especially with vocalists who are, of course, subject to the whims of the instrument they have in their body, our soprano became indisposed very, very close to the concert time. And we were really fortunate in being able to engage the wonderful American soprano Christine Brewer, who happened to be recovering from knee surgery at her home in St. Louis, and she was just being able to get up and be mobile again, and so she happened to be free, which would not have been the case ordinarily because she's incredibly popular and busy. And she was able to fly out, and so we had one of these incredible days. By the time her flight arrived, we were scheduled for a 6 o'clock Saturday concert. Her flight was scheduled to arrive at about noon in Albuquerque, of course, which meant that she could drive up here and come to the dress rehearsal, which we had scheduled, I believe, at 1 to 3 or something like that, so that she could at least sing a little bit with the other soloists. We could work together. Well, air travel being what it is, her flight was delayed and the time ticked on and ticked on. As it turned out, she walked in the backstage at the Lensic at about 5:45. And so what we did is we asked the audience to just be patient with us. She asked for about 20 minutes to change her clothes and warm up, and she and I and the other 3 soloists had about a 5-minute meeting where we talked about this spot and that spot and that spot. We went out and did a Verdi Requiem, and it was incredible. It was so exciting because of that extra little bit of adrenaline. And she was just the consummate professional, just so easy to work with and just so agreeable about fitting in. She could have easily been a diva and expected everything to revolve around her. She was not that way. It is not that way at all. And I will never forget that experience. It just shows what wonderful human beings we are able to share our music making with. We also perform a wide range of music, and we program things in sometimes some unusual combinations. And a few years ago, we did a program that revolved around the subject of Romeo and Juliet, and how different composers have been inspired to set that story in different ways, from Tchaikovsky's famous overture to the Prokofiev ballet, of which we played some excerpts, and then slightly further afield, Bernstein's and Sondheim's West Side Story, which is, of course, a retelling in a new cast. But we did it a little differently. We interspersed actors who did a couple of different scenes, but predominantly the balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet in the midst of the West Side Story, rather than in the midst of the Prokofiev. It was something a little bit different, which I think was well received. I don't have time to play that whole excerpt, but I did think it might be fun to listen to the Mambo. That recording actually helped us get an increase in our state grant a couple of years ago, which I can... whoops. We're getting ahead of me. And actually, I'm very proud to say that in this year's New Mexico Arts Panel, we received the highest score of any arts organization in the state of New Mexico, which is very pleasing to us. It recognizes our tradition, our efforts, our performances, and it's unfortunately not attached to a whole lot of money these days, but it is nice to be recognized for the work that we do. What you are about to hear is an excerpt from maybe one of the biggest undertakings that we've done in the past number of years. And this was a concert performance of Gershwin's Porgy and Bess. It's a huge thing to mount. It's a massive score. It requires an incredibly versatile and talented cast. And we were fortunate to be able to bring some incredible singers to join us. And most notably, you'll hear in just a moment, singing Summertime, the soprano Angela Brown, who has had really just beginning a spectacular career at the Met and in Europe, just an incredible voice, an incredible artist. And we were really quite fortunate to be able to have her here singing. And so this is a little excerpt from the end of the third act of Porgy and Bess, which is Bess singing Summertime, and then it morphs into the fight scene between Porgy and Crown. Now, I have to say that Lester Lynch, who was here as Porgy, and Kevin Deese, who was here as Crown, kind of surprised us all at the concert because, I mean, it's a concert version, so there's no real acting. I mean, they interacted somewhat on stage, but the stage at the Lensic is a little small for a lot of action, so we weren't quite sure what they were going to do during the fight. And all of a sudden, as we're playing this very kind of intense music on stage, we heard them backstage, I guess, bashing chairs against each other. So you will hear that in the background, and then the kind of chilling conclusion of Act 3 as Porgy reigns triumphant suddenly, having killed Crown. short excerpt from Porgy, which also features another wonderful young singer, Eric Green, baritone. And also you'll hear our chorus at the end. This is, "A woman is a sometime thing." Not quite as serious as what you just heard. And it goes on. So Eric Green, I particularly wanted to play, not just because he's got a beautiful voice, he's a wonderful singer, but he's actually returning this next season to be joining us as the baritone soloist in Brahms' German Requiem. Slightly different repertoire, but he's a wonderful young singer, and so we're thrilled to meet him. A few, to bring it back to Santa Fe, a few highlights from this coming season, and I have some program information for our upcoming season, which begins the beginning of October, which you are welcome to take with you. As I mentioned, the Brahms Requiem featuring Eric and wonderful soprano Jamie Rose Guarini, who has been an opera apprentice here. And that's another collaboration we've had for a number of years, is being able to utilize some of the apprentices who are here in the summers to bring them back during the concert season as soloists in some vocal works that we do. But we'll also have our annual performance of Handel's Messiah, symphonies by Sibelius, Schumann. Our opening concert, which is a tour de force for the orchestra, will feature Richard Strauss's Don Juan, as well as Respighi's Pines of Rome. And our soloist on that concert is a winner of the American Pianists Association competition, and he'll be playing Mozart Piano Concerto and the Liszt Totentanz. Violinist I mentioned from the Indianapolis competition will be rounding out our season in May, playing the Lalo Symphony Espanol, and on that concert, which will also be kind of a celebration of New Mexico statehood at that point in 2012, the centennial of statehood, of course, and we'll be playing a suite from the film score from the Milagro Beanfield War, which, as you know, was filmed here in New Mexico and was written by Dave Grusin, a Santa Fe resident. And so we're going to be very, very delighted to be able to present that music. So anyway, those are a few highlights of next season. I mentioned the historical perspective and some of the arrangements and research that I've done over the years. And I just wanted to play one piece that was an arrangement that I did for the orchestra of a piece that was written by an early 20th century resident and composer, band leader in Santa Fe, Jose Garcia, who for many years ran what was then known as La Banda de Santa Fe. And they, of course, played music for many, many different social occasions and concert performances. And this was a piece in particular, which I thought would be fun to arrange for the orchestra. And it's officially known as a Paso Doble Flamenco. It has the slightly politically incorrect name, reflective of the time of Los Conquistadores. And so it was undoubtedly used in fiesta at times. But anyway, it's I think, a wonderful piece that is so much a part of Santa Fe history and tradition. So as you can hear, we can perform and enjoy performing a wide variety of music, and it's certainly a tradition that we've kept up for a long time and hope to do for many more years into the future. I'd like to close just by talking a little bit about some of the things that happen in our community behind the scenes that are maybe not as readily apparent to average people beyond our concerts. A lot of activities are undertaken by a group called Fanfare, which is our guild, and this is a relatively large group of people, close to 100 actually, who are very, very active in particularly activities connected to education and community engagement. And so they help support quite a few things, one of which is our annual concerts for all of the fourth grade children in the area, for all of the public schools as well as some of the private schools. We have kids who come from pueblos, from many other towns around. We have occasionally had mini residencies in Pecos where we go up and play for the kids and do an evening concert, and they help make that possible. A really important aspect of our fourth grade concerts each year is a bilingual presentation, and we've collaborated with Joe Hayes, the wonderful storyteller, on a bilingual Peter and the Wolf Carnival of the Animals, and really been able to I think, open a world into the orchestra and into music for a lot of kids for whom it might be their first trip to the Lensic and their first opportunity to see the orchestra. Fanfare also sponsors a mentoring program where musicians from our orchestra go into schools and work with kids in their bands and orchestras specifically on their instruments and help give them some tools for success in that way. They also are active as a fundraising body and engage in a number of different projects, most notably one that has achieved nationwide recognition, and it's something called the Painted Violins, in which violins were given to 60-some artists, I believe, who volunteered to produce a unique work of art that was then auctioned in a benefit to raise money. And we are actually repeating that project coming up in a couple of years. And so we're working now to get artists involved, and that's been a very exciting thing. Outside of the fanfare things, we have performed on the plaza as part of the pancake breakfast on July 4th. We've been a part of the 400th celebrations, both a concert last fall at the Lensic, as well as an outdoor concert at Fort Marcy Park the previous spring. Rainstorm, I might add, which was very interesting. Each Christmas time, we give a free public performance at the Cathedral Basilica, carols and choruses featuring our chorus, some other guests from the community, featuring also our brass quintet, and it's an opportunity for us to be able to welcome people in and share in the Christmas season with us. Another collaboration which we've been involved in for about 3 years now, and we're looking forward to the third presentation next fall, is with the Santa Fe Institute and finding out ways that we can connect music and the sciences in all of its various ways. The first was an adventure that delved into the kind of historical convenience of Mendelssohn and Darwin being born about 2 weeks apart from each other, but we found a whole number of other fascinating parallels in how incredibly influential both of these people were in their relative endeavors. And so that was our first exploration. Last year we produced also in collaboration with the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, a presentation of Holst's The Planets with a unique film. And this coming fall, we are doing a program with them called Bach on the Brain, which will feature the music of Bach, both in its original form, but also transcriptions, work by other composers like Villalobos, Paul Moravec, who have been influenced by the music of Bach. And it will be connected with Dr. Chris Wood from the Institute, who will be talking about brain function and some of the exciting research that is taking place today on how the brain responds to flies going on, how the brain responds to musical impulse. And I think it'll be a fascinating production. And as I alluded to already, we'll be celebrating the centennial of statehood next May. So I'd like to leave us with just about a 1-minute snippet from another fanfare activity, which was also a national award-winning project. They produced a DVD called We Are the Music, which traveled, so you're familiar with it, traveled throughout the state and explored all of the varieties of cultural life and music in the state, as represented by so many groups within the population. And it is now being used as an educational resource in many school systems around the state, and I think is just an incredibly beautiful and valuable project that fanfare undertook. So I'm just going to play the introduction, which will just give you a little taste for what it's about. I think the only sound is actually going to now be on this computer. So. So that's a little taste of that really wonderful project. All of the performers that are featured in that project are from youth ensembles or mixed adult and youth ensembles. It's narrated by kids. It's really, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece that they produced. And so we're very proud of the work that Fanfare does in that regard. I have these brochures if you're interested, and thank you very much for coming today and learning a bit more about the San Francisco. Stick these on the back too.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, of course.
What is the role of the director
The role
versus...
of the music director specifically is that I basically oversee what it is that we do on the stage in terms of helping to plan repertoire. We have a committee that I work with to do that. But that doesn't mean I'm not involved in other things like budgets and speaking in the community and being...
But there's still a conductor in addition to you.
No, I am
you
the
are the
music director and conductor are kind
go.
of simultaneous
I
terms.
see, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.